Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. So everyone seems to be talking about the Snyder Cut right now, how amazing it is that Warner Brothers and HBO Max enabled the director to get his vision through. I was actually following the story of the Snyder Cut for a long time now, and I think the story of it actually getting made and just this entire journey of Zack Snyder to getting the film out might actually be more interesting than the film itself. So having watched both the Snyder Cut and Justice League these past few weeks, basically, I'm not sure if there's been a situation where we had this chance to see the same film told in very different ways. We've had a lot of director cuts in the past, but they usually served as an extended version of the original. They built on the same tone, the same theatrics, the same visual style. But here, the Justice League and the Snyder Cut are very different films, and in this video I'm going to explore why one is vastly superior to the other, even though they're basically telling the same story. I think that I should start off by saying that I'm really not the biggest Zack Snyder fan, or really a huge comic book fan, but still, I think I am a fan. 300 was a really cool film for its time. It was a cultural event that everyone talked about at the time. Its use of slow motion and this heavily stylized visuals was something unseen at the time, and its influence on other action films since then is really undeniable in my view. Then there's Man of Steel, which is probably the best DCU film for me up until this point. I don't like the final stage of the film, basically the epic showdown between Superman and Zod, but if you exclude that, I think the first 2/3 of the film are actually really, really good. And I think it's been kind of overlooked and underrated in recent years. But it is Watchmen that is, in my opinion, the best thing that Zack Snyder has ever done. I remember seeing it in the cinema and not knowing anything about it, and I was just blown away. All of Zack Snyder's tools were put to work, and they worked really great. His visual style greatly complemented the comic book setting, and its focus on character development justified its longer running time, and there was this tense, dark atmosphere and a feeling of a film that is a lot more epic in scope than your usual comic book flick. And oddly enough, the storytelling and the visual style of Snyder Cut is actually, in my opinion, the most resembling that of Watchmen, and I think it's also the main reason that it works so well. And I think that's a pretty good place to start when comparing the two. The overall look of the films, the color grading, the aspect ratio, and even the look of individual characters. Snyder Cut has the Snyder look. Its image is often heavily stylized, the colors are undersaturated, the shadows are enhanced, and the overall tone is very dark. This gives the entire film a more of a graphic novel look, and the execution of these visuals is definitely Zack Snyder's strength as a filmmaker. You could even argue that it is his auteur signature, as you immediately know a Snyder film when you see it. It has a singular, unique tone, and all the other elements like music, the pacing, and the writing all play into this tone. They create a dark atmosphere which enables the film to build tension throughout its long runtime. Similarly to Watchmen, it greatly complements a comic book storytelling structure which benefits even more from the film being separated into chapters. And while scenes like this Aquaman scene felt like they came out of nowhere in the Justice League, here they fit in because they feel like just another entry in a comic book. And then, when you look at Justice League, it has the visual look of a rom-com, really. Its colors are oversaturated, which makes Bruce Wayne look like he just got out of a sauna in most scenes. The shadows are toned way down, and for me it feels like it doesn't really have an identity. And this creates a boring and sterile atmosphere, which is made even worse by its many inserted jokes and gags, which, after the blunder of Batman v Superman and its very dark and broody atmosphere, can be seen like, this desperate attempt by the studio to come closer to the ever-growing popularity of the lighthearted MCU, which, in my view, is a complete misunderstanding by Warner Brothers of why the DCU was actually failing when compared to the MCU, as in blaming the tone of the films instead of looking at the writing and the actual story structure and the characters. All of this is made even worse by the fact that it tries to cram all the story and characters into a 2-hour movie, further eliminating any space for character development, leaving the viewer in the cold with no characters to empathize with. But why are there no characters to empathize with in the first place? One could make the simple argument of runtime. With the Snyder Cut being almost twice as long, obviously there's going to be more room for character development. But I don't think that's the case here. Yes, there is more time for character development in the Snyder Cut, but Snyder could have easily used this time to fill the film with action scenes and, epic set pieces. Instead, he puts in a lot of, subtle character moments that seem kind of useless in terms of advancing the plot, but actually have a lot of emotional payoff later down the line, and they make certain key beats of the story be much more significant in his version of the film than they were in Joss Whedon's. When it comes to the tone of characters specifically, I'd say the character Flash was the biggest victim in the original, where his only purpose was to literally be used as some comic relief throughout the entire film. The most significant thing he ever does in the Justice League is saving this Russian family, and even that is quickly played off by this cheap Superman gag, and honestly one of the cringiest jokes in the entire film.
Dostoevsky!
He's constantly portrayed as weak and scared, and the way he's just used in every scene is to just somehow lighten it up with some awkward joke, which kind of falls flat every time. In the Snyder Cut, he does serve as a comic relief, but his role within the Justice League is elevated from really what was really just a group clown to an actual invaluable part of the team. You could even say that he's the MVP in the finale, as he literally saves the day in what was, for me, the single coolest scene in the entire film, and possibly the entire DCU up to this point. I'm not sure if this scene was part of the Snyder Cut reshoot or if Snyder Cut shot it during the original production, but if he did, then I have absolutely no idea why Joss Whedon at the studio would leave it out. I mean, it is visually breathtaking, it has a really cool display of someone's powers, and even packs a bit of an emotional punch, although Barry's monologue definitely could have been a bit better. Then there's also a lot more character backstory. Steppenwolf gets more attention here. Not only does he look better, I mean, that's not a high mark considering that in the original he looked like some basic video game NPC that you kill in the introductory quest line. But he also gets some backstory here. He's no longer just some weirdo with an Oedipus complex that keeps raving about Mother and nobody has an idea what the hell he's talking about.
Mother, no mother, praise to the mother of horrors.
But no character has seen a bigger shift in terms of attention given to his journey than Cyborg. In the Justice League, he just kind of comes off as just grumpy and mad at the world with no clear reason behind it. His power description is kind of vague, and he's kind of bullied by Aquaman, and he's made to look like some sort of a freak of the group. In the Snyder Cut, we get a much more detailed glimpse into his life and the actual reason for the strained relationship with his father. And thanks to this, we actually understand his emotional state in most scenes and can relate to him. While these scenes do not directly serve to advance the plot, as I mentioned earlier, and were no doubt cut because of that, they lay the groundwork for emotional payoff later down the line. And because we've had multiple scenes between Cyborg and his father, once he gets kidnapped, the scene where the group decides to go into the canals to rescue the kidnapped people, well, it suddenly has a much bigger emotional stakes, because the scene isn't just about finding random kidnapped people, but it's also about Cyborg going to rescue his father. And while they're not on good terms, we as an audience naturally root for a cathartic moment between the two. And this isn't fully paid off until a later scene in the film, right after they resurrect Superman, which serves as a major emotional moment for Cyborg. And this is not the case just with Cyborg. For example, Lois Lane gets a similar treatment. All these scenes where we see her struggling and, waking up and mourning Clark and going through her day. She's talking to Martha, they're all kind of down. They might seem like they have no clear purpose for the plot, but because we've seen her struggle, then when we get to this moment, it suddenly serves as a major payoff for what came before it, and this is completely absent from the Justice League. Its absence also sheds light on another issue, which is that a lot of the scenes that were left out in the original had resulted in a very boring film despite being shorter. The reason was that there was no tension building whatsoever. Even in the Lois scene, the Snyder Cut version is much more dramatic because it is Lois that first sees what happened and that Superman is back alive. In the original, it basically plays out like this, and the audience immediately knows what's up. And come to think of it, when it comes to resurrecting Superman, the entire setup of it is constructed very differently in each version, with the Snyder Cut being vastly superior once again. Every scene is just much longer, from the debate about bringing Superman back to their arrival at the Kryptonian ship, and even like small things like the Flash and the exchange with the security when they're trying to get inside the facility, to them navigating the corridor once the alarm goes off and they run into Cyborg's dad. There's just these separate storylines running into each other. It builds tension, and tension is everything. Where you have a scene that needs to be dramatic and have a climax, like resurrecting the most powerful superhero in the world. But it's not just the length that builds tension, it's also what's at stake. In the Justice League, there are no high stakes. Batman decides that they should bring Superman back to life, and so they go and do it. Aquaman objects, but nobody really cares. Flash has a little moment to shine, and whoop, there we go. We're shown Superman is back, we have a little fight, and oh well, Steppenwolf got the last mother box. Oh, and yeah, then we get this.
Yeah. Something is definitely bleeding.
In the Snyder Cut, the stakes are much higher because there's an actual debate about bringing Superman back and whether he should be brought back and how it means exposing themselves and the mother box to Steppenwolf. They are potentially risking everything here, and if the plan fails, they fail. And them failing could mean the end of the world. And it's only Bruce's unrelenting faith that kind of convinces the group to go on board with it. There are many other instances where Justice League decided to trim scenes down and only leave in the bits that are necessary for the plot to advance. And almost in every case, this makes the scenes lacking tension, which in turn makes the film much more boring despite its shorter runtime. What's even worse though is that the film decided to sacrifice tension and then plug in stuff like this.
Tell me. Do you bleed?
And this.
Oof. You're gorgeous and fierce and strong and
And this.
Well, I knew you didn't bring me back because you like me.
I don't. Not.
Now, make no mistake. It doesn't mean that the Snyder Cut couldn't make without a few scenes of its own. I mean, the epilogue felt unnecessarily long, and it was just kind of this fan service that I don't really like. Like, it's just putting in characters for the sake of putting in characters, even though it has nothing to do with the story. Especially the scene with Jared Leto's Joker, whose portrayal was just terrible, and especially now that it comes after last year's performance by Joaquin Phoenix. So yeah, I wasn't digging this. Then you have the accents that are still pretty weird.
You dare speak of Queen Adlana that way? It would have been her responsibility to follow that monster to the surface and stop him.
It has slept for thousands of years, since the First Age. Why did it wake at all?
Show her the darkness before the daylight of history. Warn my daughter that war has come. And protect her.
But at least Aquaman yelling like he's Tarzan or something is gone. Although his action stunts in the finale are still kind of bad. And of course those hideous scenes of a mustache removal are gone. The one thing that bothered me the most was probably that there's just a really big overuse of slow motion in my opinion. Someone should just tell Zack Snyder that, while these ultra slow motion shots were something absolutely cool and new when 300 came around, and even in subsequent films since then, now they just seem outdated in most scenes. And also these character intros. I mean, we've seen too many superhero films by now, so unless you're making a parody, there really is no excuse to include these anymore. They just look silly, in my opinion. If there was one thing that I would have loved for the Snyder Cut to change or include, it would be to have a segment of the story where we could see some good old Batman action. This was by far the best scene in Batman v Superman in my opinion, and I just wish that we had something similar to it in Justice League. Maybe Batman just has to go on a mission to retrieve something essential for them in order to beat Steppenwolf, or something that they need to bring Clark back. I don't know. I just wanted to see Batfleck beat the shit out of people one last time, Anyway, overall, the Snyder Cut was a massive success, and after reading about Zack's story surrounding the original film, I'm really happy that he got to tell his version of the story in exactly the way that he wanted to. I think it's a triumph both for HBO Max and Zack Snyder. It is a completely different retelling of the Justice League story, and it makes you wonder just how many potentially great films have been butchered by the studio system and various reshoots in the past. For me personally, it was much better than expected. When it comes to Snyder films and the DC universe, I'd still say I enjoyed Man of Steel more. And when it comes to his filmography as a whole, Watchmen are still up there for me. But having said that, the Snyder Cut is still a big success. And it seems that it now jump-started a campaign to bring the entire Snyderverse back. So I wish them luck. I'm not as hyped as most people though, mainly because I don't think that this Snyderverse will involve bringing back Ben Affleck for a solo movie, since the Pattinson movie is already being made. Anyway, thank you for watching guys, and see you in my next video. I think I'll be making my top 10 of 2020 this week, as I finally managed to watch all the major contenders from past year or so. So stay tuned and see you next time.